Hi, my name is Yanis. I'm slash RSM on the internet, whether Drupal.org and all the other platforms. Slides are online. It's the link at the bottom of the page, and I also tweeted them with hashtag DrupalCorn, so you will be able to find that link. If you go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so I'm team lead at MD Systems, and can you please just show all the items? Yeah, great, thanks. I'm team lead at MD Systems. MD Systems is a web agency based out of Zurich. I've been active member of Drupal community since 2009. I'm heavily involved in Drupal 8 media initiative. And I used to work for a company called Examiner.com, which was one of the first and biggest first Drupal 7 websites, and it has been the biggest for quite a long time. Fortunately, it was discontinued last month, but since it was a news portal, I had to deal with a lot of media-related problems there, and this was also my main interest. To get involved into the media initiative. Now, if you press the down button, you will go to the next sub-slide. Great, thanks. So, as I said, I'm working for MD Systems. It's a quite small shop based out of Zurich, as I already said. We are biggest company contributors to Drupal. If you go to Drupal services page, we used to be on the first place. Now today I saw that Acquia is in the first place again. But if you compare the size of the company, I guess we can still say that we're the biggest. We are almost exclusively doing Drupal 8 projects, especially media projects, because we built enterprise media distribution called MP8. Our CTO is Sasha Grossenbacher, aka Birdie. If you are involved in the Drupal community, you probably heard of him. He's one of the top D8 contributors. And yeah, that's it. If you go to the next slide. As I already mentioned earlier, I'm not in Switzerland. I live in Slovenia. I've been working remotely for my entire career, and for me it works quite good. I really like it. And if you don't know much about remote work, or if you think that it's not possible to do it, then I strongly suggest this book, Remote, Office Not Required, which was written by the founders of 37 Signals, which is the company behind Basecamp. They are also a completely distributed company all around the world, more or less. And in this book, they explain how they do it, and I strongly suggest it. Next slide, please. Oh, I have 3 girls. Next slide. I like to travel. I like to travel to nice places. Next slide. And also to not so nice places, because then we can see what we have. Because a lot of times we forget. And we don't realize that there are a lot of people that live in much worse conditions than we. Next slide. I like to have fun, do silly things. Next. And a lot of times I think about stuff that it's too hard to solve. Next slide. And I'm always happy to help, especially related to all the Drupal community related work that I do. If you will be using any of D8 Media Initiative modules and you will have problems, feel free to get in touch. I always try to help, and I always try to respond in a timely manner. because I know how it feels if you're ignored, and I try not to ignore people. Next slide. So let's see what this session will be about. We will be talking about the Entity Browser module, which is a new module, a new concept in the D8 world. It was born as part of the media initiative to solve problems in multimedia management area, but it's designed in a very general way, and as a result of that, you can use it in many other areas or for many other use cases. I will explain architecture a little bit, which is quite complex, quite abstract, and people sometimes struggle to understand it. We will see where we can use it, what kind of use cases we can cover with it. We will also see how it integrates with the inline entity form module, and I will briefly talk about the roadmap that is ahead of us. Next slide. So, have you ever, next slide, next sub-slide please, tried to upload, next sub-slide, tried to upload more than one image at once. Here we see the standard article form with the image field, and now we're opening Entity Browser and uploading 2 images with drag and dropping, and they appear in this field. And then we can populate other required fields and save it, and we're done. Next sub-slide. So have you ever tried to select images from a media library? Next sub-slide. Here we have very similar use case, article with an image field. When we open the Entity Browser, we go to the second tab in this case and select a few items from that list, and it behaves exactly the same. Next sub-slide. And maybe you thought about combining both. Next sub-slide. Here we're doing exactly the same, except that we want to attach few images from the library and then upload a few more in one step. So right now we're in the file images library. We select 4 images. Then we go back to the upload step. We can see the intermediary selection below. We can remove something from that intermediary selection. We can decide to upload another image or 2. And then when we upload them, they appear again below the uploader. We can reorder this selection, and when we are happy with it, we can send it back to the image field. And now we have to populate alternative text and so forth. Next sub-slide. Or not media-related use case. Have you ever tried to have a reference from an article that would bring in related content? Next sub-slide. Interesting. So here you should see a GIF where you do something very similar, but instead of uploading images, you have an entity reference field, an entity browser. When you open entity browser, you will be presented with a view, and that view will have checkboxes like very similar to what you maybe used from like the content listing page, and then you select a few nodes and submit, and then these nodes are connected with the original piece of content. And since that is a view, you can attach like exposed filters to it, which means that you are able to search and filter or reorder that list, etc. Next sub-slide. Yeah, or maybe you needed to create an entity without leaving the context of that original entity. Next slide. Yeah. So here, in that modal that appears with that opens the entity browser, you are presented with another entity form, and you can create an entity form in line without leaving that page where you're creating your original piece of content. Next slide. So all this is already possible, yeah, it's no hacks. It's already all the features that are in basic core entity browser. Next slide. So to answer this basic question, what is entity browser? Entity browser is a general entity browsing and selecting tool. It can work with any entity type. You can use it with files, media entities, nodes, taxonomy terms, commerce products, you name it. It's completely up to you. And it can work with fields, like as we've seen in the example with files. It can work with file and image fields. It can work with entity reference fields. You can also use it to embed entities into WYSIWYG, which is responsibility of another module called Entity Embed, which is a very cool module. Check it out if you didn't yet. Or you can also use it on your custom forms. If you are building a form where you want to present user with an interface where entities can be created or selected, you can do that. And I will show you later how you achieve that. Next slide. Or next slide.
Next slide.
Yeah, so let's talk about the architecture. It's very powerful and flexible. The architecture, as I said earlier, it's very abstract, and it heavily uses the core plugin system. So if you are familiar with core plugins, then you will be easily able to extend Entity Browser to next slide. Here we see a wireframe that we created initially when we were designing Entity Browser. And it kind of shows like one of the most standard use cases that we wanted to cover. On the top, we have tabs which allow us to switch between so-called widgets. So a widget in this case is that area below the tabs that has a white background. And widget is the main meat of the Entity Browser. Widget is plugin that will create most of user experience for the user and that will actually provide entities for you. And then the section below with gray background is intermediary selection display. This is used in that case where you have this where you want to support this multi-step flow. We saw that earlier when we selected few images from the library and then uploaded a few more, and then we ordered the intermediary selection, and when we were happy with it, we basically pressed this use selected button, which then passed that selection to the parent form. Next slide. And yeah, each of these areas, it's basically own plugin type. First and most important plugin type, as I already said, is a widget. Widget is indicated with the red square on this slide. If you go to the next slide. and if you show all the items. So widget is part of entity browser that decides which entities are selected, and like selected, it's a little bit of a strange word because you can also create them on the fly, as we've seen with the uploader. But we treat these as a selection because we don't care what widget does to create entities. It can be a view, which you can use to list entities and then add checkboxes to them, and use tools that you are probably already familiar with. It can be a file uploader, which then creates file or media entities in the background. We already have like pretty basic standard HTML5 multi-uploader, and we have DrupalCorn driven uploader, which is what you've seen earlier. DrupalCorn is a uploading library. There is a module for Drupal 8 which integrates with it, and we are using that module to create an entity browser widget. Then you can also have a widget that executes API queries to a third-party service and displays results that come from there. For example, you could have a widget that searches YouTube and displays YouTube video thumbnails and then creates entities for you as you select them. Same with get images. We had that at Examiner, or Flickr, Vimeo, you name it. And then you can also have an entity form. Like when you open a widget, it can provide you with an entity form, let's say for a page node, and then when you fill all the fields up, you can save that, and the entity will be provided through the entity browser. All the widgets that have stars next to them are already implemented, and there are ideas for, and I think that some people already started working on at least YouTube widget. Next slide. If you want to implement your own widget, you have to create a plugin that implements widget interface, and you basically have to implement 3 methods. GetForm, which will return the form that will be presented to the user to do something with that widget. Then you can implement validate callback that will validate entities that were being selected. And then at the end you have submit callback that needs to basically load the entities, put them into an array, and call a function on the base class to tell entity browser that they were being selected. Next slide. So, next plugin type. Next plugin type is what is represented with tabs on this mock, and it's called Widget Selector. This plugin allows you to select which widget out of all the available widgets on the current entity browser you want to use. In the example earlier, where we were uploading and selecting files from the library, we had 2 widgets. One was uploader and the other one was a view. And we had tabs widget selector, because we were presented with tabs, and when we clicked on tabs, the widgets changed. Next slide. And yeah, and all the items, please. So widget selector is used to switch between widgets. The most obvious widget selector is single widget. In some cases, you for example, maybe you only want to support uploading files. And in that case, you don't want to bother your user with tabs or anything else. And this is the purpose of single widget. It won't display any UI, and it will always display just the first widget that is configured on the entity browser. Next item, please. And all the items. Then we can have drop-down widget, which could can present a drop-down, and you can select the widget that you want from the drop-down. You can have buttons, you can have tabs. I assume that most people will use tabs, but we wanted to show how to implement different things. Next step. Next slide. Again, if you want to implement...
Sorry, I think I hit too many buttons.
Yes, thank you. Again, if you want to implement your own widget selector, you implement an interface and implement similar functions than before: get form, validate, and submit. On submit, you return the UID of the widget that was selected, and you also have to implement the set default widget function, which will be used by Entity Browser when it loads to tell you which widget is initially selected, is initially presented to the user. Next slide. And we came to selection display. Selection display is this gray part at the bottom. If we go to the next slide. A selection display is responsible for displaying entities that are currently selected. It can be so-called no display, which means that basically that you don't support multi-step flow, and as soon as one of the widgets will return some entities, those entities will be pushed back to the parent form. Next item. Yeah, then it can be a view display, which is you can create a view, and then that view will be used to display entities at the bottom. It has few limitations. Like if you have one entity selected more than one time, it won't. It will still display just once, and it won't respect your ordering. So it's not really usable, but it also shows how things can be used. Next item. And then rendered entity display, or we also call it multi-step display, is what you've seen earlier in the animated GIF. It basically renders entities and allows you to reorder them and remove them from the selection. Yeah, so most of people, I guess, will either use no display or this one. Next slide. Oh yeah, entity label is similar, but instead of rendering the entity with thumbnail or teaser or anything like that, it just displays a label. I guess that there was some more sub-slides on the previous part.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. And then the fourth, and if you can reveal all the items, please. Yeah, great. So the fourth plugin type is so-called display plugin, which defines how Entity Browser will be presented to the user. Currently, we have 3 plugins. One is Modal, which is what you've seen earlier. When you open the Entity Browser, it will open in the modal. Then we also have iframe plugin, which will open an iframe in the parent form, or standalone plugin that will be on its own separate page. Most people, it seems, tend to use modal because it looks nicest. Next slide. Yeah, if you have very special needs, you can implement your own display. You have to implement the display interface and then implement a function that displays it in the context of the parent form and the function that is called when entities are selected and selection is completed. Also in this case we have a base class, so I assume that people that will do that will mostly want to change the appearance of the plugin, which means that they will probably extend one of the existing plugins and override the first function that is responsible for display. Now we can go to the next slide. So where can we use Entity Browser today? Next sub-slide. We can use it as an entity reference field widget. This is a screen from a node edit form and represents an entity reference field where we can see 3 related nodes that are attached to this field, and you can, if in this case, you can drag them around to define the order of those entities, and you can also edit them if you want, which will open another dialog where you can edit those entities or you can remove them from the selection. It works very similar with file and image fields, except that there you are presented with a table which is trying to follow core's behavior as much as possible. Next slide. Yes, this is what I was talking about, is file or image field. It works almost exactly the same as entity reference, just the appearance is different. And it also, it knows, it's aware about the additional metadata that is present on these fields, like image title, image alternative text, or file description, and those fields will be presented to the user as well. Next slide. And you can also use it in entity embed. In this example, we are using entity embed module. We just selected an image from the entity browser, and now we are at the entity embed configuration step, where we define how that image should appear when embedded into WYSIWYG. We can also add title and alternative text and caption. And now our image is embedded in the WYSIWYG editor. As I said, this is responsibility of entity embed module. Yeah, entity embed module is also pretty feature not complete, but it's like ready for widespread use, I would say. This week we released what we plan to be the last alpha version, and if there will be no critical bugs reported, it will get the beta release in 2 weeks. So I strongly suggest you to look at it. Next slide. Or you can use it in a custom form, as I promised earlier. We created a form element, and if you want to use Entity Browser to provide entities for your custom form, you just use this form element called Entity Browser, and the only requirement argument that it needs is the ID of the Entity Browser that should be used. And then you can also provide cardinality limits or additional validation requirements and change its behavior a little bit. If you're interested in that, check the documentation that is on this class. It's all written there. Next slide. So here is where I was planning to do the demos, which I am not able to, which is a bummer. So I was trying to show you how to configure entity reference fields that references nodes, to use entity browser to be able to search nodes on your site and to select related content. This was the first demo that I wanted to do. And then if you go to the next sub-slide, I wanted to show you how to configure that example that we've seen on animated GIFs earlier with images and DrupalCorn.js upload plus the library. If you would like to try to implement that, I strongly suggest you to check the file entity browser module. Its machine name is file_browser. I can also tweet it. It's basically a module that creates predefined configuration for you. And when you enable it, you get the entity browser, and if you enable example module in there, you will have a demo node type with a field and already everything configured to use the entity browser. So if you would like to test that, I suggest you to use that module. And if you run into any problems, let me know. Next sub-slide. And the third demo that I wanted to do is integration with inline entity form. Inline entity form is a powerful entity reference widget that came from Drupal Commerce World. And since it's not limited just to commerce entity types, we can use it for any entity type. And we integrated with it. So in inline entity form, you are able to create entities inline or to reference existing entities and then maybe further edit them or modify them. For that second feature, like referencing existing entities, inline entity form gives you like the standard Drupal autocomplete text field. And what we've done with entity browser integration is that we replaced that autocomplete field with the entity browser, which means that now instead of searching based on the title, you can create an entity browser and do everything what entity browsers are able to do. I gave this same session at Drupal Dev Days in Milan. And it has been recorded there. I just don't know if recordings are published already, which I can quickly check. No, unfortunately not. So when those videos will be published, you could potentially watch that video and see the demos, because it's more or less the same. There were a few improvements in entity browser recently that aren't covered there, but the basic idea is the same. I can try to ask organizers of the Milan Dev Days if when they're planning to publish those videos, and I can communicate that to DrupalCorn camp organizers. Next slide, please. So, what's the current roadmap? Last month, We had a week-long sprint as part of the NICE camp in New York, and we achieved a ton of things that were waiting for us. So after that, we released new alpha version. I believe it's alpha 7, and the plan was to wait for 2 weeks and to release beta if there are no critical bugs reported. Unfortunately, we got a few bug reports immediately after the alpha release. They are not critical, but we would like to wait for module to stabilize a little bit. So I guess that we will release another alpha, I guess, next week, and then wait for 2 weeks. If there are no huge bugs reported, we will release beta. So I hope that by the end of August, we should get beta. We still have to improve a few things. We would mostly like to focus on UX at this point. We probably won't be adding much new features for a while now, because we want module to stabilize a little bit, and we need to improve our test coverage. But yeah, you can use it. We don't plan to introduce any more changes that would break backward compatibility. Last changes like that happened in July at NICE Camp, and right now we just want to focus on stabilizing it and fixing bugs and improving tests, which means that it should be pretty stable. And also, most of the bugs that were reported after last alpha version are already fixed in the latest dev. So we're trying to be as responsive as possible. Next slide, please. Yep, that's it. I'm extremely sorry for technical difficulties. I was hoping for this session to be much better, but unfortunately technology didn't cooperate this time. If you have any questions, feel free to tweet me or email me. You can email me through contact form on Drupal.org or through contact form on my blog, which you see here. The URL to my blog you can see here. I will also be at DrupalCorn Dublin, so if you're going there and if you have questions or ideas, you can find me and we can discuss. Or you can always find me on IRC. I'm /RSM and usually available on Drupal-media IRC channel or Drupal-contribute, among others. Yeah. Now, if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them. I would like to apologize you one more time for the technical difficulties. I'm still not sure what happened with the screen sharing.
If anyone in the room has questions, either speak loud or come up. Please.
Sure. Any movement on getting this into core with the media initiative?
Yeah, so yeah, long term, it will be nice to have something like that in core. If we would have something like this there, it would be much easier to implement like more complex workflows. However, I don't think that it's ready yet. I would like module to be in contrib for at least some time, for more people to use it, because then we will see if the architecture and assumptions that we made are correct or not. We can see like very good adoption, so I'm comfortable that we will get a lot of nice feedback, and maybe after 1 or 2 iterations where we rethink the architecture and how it works, I guess it should be ready to become part of core. So long-term plan, yes, definitely. When that would happen, I don't feel comfortable to give many estimates.
Thanks.
Unfortunately.
I have a question.
Any more questions?
One more for you.
Yes, it looks like, so the project page says there's a D7 version of this, it's the Indie type browser module. And I'm assuming, is that similar or the same? Is that backcourt or?
Can you repeat the question closer to the microphone?
Yeah, I guess I'm just looking at the D7 version Indie type browser. Are they basically the same?
Did you catch it that time, or do you want me to repeat it for you?
Entity, yeah, I'm not familiar with that module, so I can't comment on that. I can check it. How it's called? Entity.
Yeah, it looks like it's Indie type browser. There's a note that says the previous Drupal 7 module has been moved to Indie type browser module.
Okay, yeah. So that module is it has a totally different use case. It used to live in the entity browser's namespace earlier, but then when we started planning entity browser, we reached to the maintainer of the entity type browser, and he was extremely nice to give us the namespace, and he moved his module to entity type browser. Entity type browser, as far as I understand, and I checked it briefly initially when we started working on entity browser, it just gives you the listing of all the entity types that you have. It's not a general selecting tool as entity browser is. It's quite different, and that's also I guess the main reason why maintainer of that module moved it to the new namespace, because new namespace should represent better what this module is about. So functionality is completely different.
Okay, so there is no D7 version.
Sorry, I was muted. So there's no Drupal 7 version of your module?
No, it's D8 only.
Thank you.
It uses D8 design patterns so heavily that it would be quite hard to backport it, I think.
Anybody else, or? I'm not seeing any more questions, so I'll thank you for your time today, and yeah, we'll let you get back.